I was lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, the soft beeping of machines breaking the silence, when my daughter walked in with that look. You know the look kids get when they've got something so big, so out of the ordinary, that they don't even know where to start. Her coat was still zipped up against the chilly wind outside, her hair a little messy from the walk in. She didn't even sit right away, she just stood there for a second, smiling like she was holding onto a secret. Finally, she pulled the chair close, leaned forward, and said, "Dad, a famous TV pastor is going to pray for you." Now, in my defense, the medication they'd been giving me could make a phone call from Elvis sound plausible, so I just stared at her for a moment. I blinked. "Oh, what now?" She grinned. "A pastor. From TV. He knows about you. He's going to pray for you." Before I could wrap my head around how that was even possible, the door swung open. My doctor stepped in, carrying my chart like he always did, only this time, he didn't just look at me. He glanced at my daughter, then back at me, and said with this curious little smile, "Well, that's not something I hear every day." It wasn't the usual polite doctor smile. This one was warmer, softer. Almost as if he knew something I didn't. And in that moment, I felt something strange, a little spark of curiosity that managed to slip through the heavy fog of my illness. See, before that moment, optimism was in short supply for me. Cancer doesn't just eat away at your body, it chips at your hope. By then, I'd been in the hospital for weeks. The days had blurred together into a cycle of tests, treatments, and fatigue so deep it felt like part of my bones. I had become used to bad news, used to flat voices reading numbers from charts. But here was my daughter, eyes bright, and my doctor, smiling like we'd just been let in on a joke from the universe. How on earth? I started to ask. My daughter just reached for my hand and said, "Dad, I'll tell you everything. But you have to hear it from the beginning." And in that moment, I realized there was more to this than some celebrity doing a kind thing. Something about the way she looked at me told me this story had a few twists, the kind you don't see coming. Now, I'm not here to preach, and I'm not here to convince anyone how they should believe. I've had my own complicated relationship with faith over the years. But I can tell you this, what happened next. It didn't just change my day. It shifted something in me that had been stuck for a long time. Whether you call it fate, faith, or plain coincidence, this story made me see the world differently. But before you can understand why that prayer and that doctor's smile meant what it did, you need to know how I ended up in that hospital bed in the first place. Because this all started months earlier, with a cough I thought was nothing, and news I never imagined I'd hear. If you had told me a year earlier that I'd be lying in a hospital bed with cancer, I would have laughed it off. Not because I thought I was invincible, I knew my body had its limits, but because, until then, my life had been ordinary. Work, family dinners, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, and falling asleep in my chair halfway through a movie. It started small. A cough. One of those annoying little dry coughs that pops up in winter and clings on long after you've shaken off the flu. I figured it was just the season. Or maybe my sinuses. Or the dust from the garage project I'd been working on. Weeks passed. Then months. And the cough didn't leave. I remember my daughter teasing me, "Dad, you sound like a car that won't start." We both laughed. I promised I'd get it checked out. But deep down, I thought, it's nothing. One morning, I was halfway through my coffee when I coughed so hard I dropped the mug. My chest felt like someone had taken a fist and pressed it right against my ribs. My wife insisted, demanded that I see the doctor. The first appointment was routine. A stethoscope. A chest x-ray just to be sure. The doctor smiled politely, told me it was probably bronchitis, and sent me home with antibiotics. Except, the cough didn't care about antibiotics. It stayed. A few weeks later, they ordered a CT scan. That's when things began to feel different. I still remember the phone call. It was late afternoon, and the light from the kitchen window was falling across the table in that golden way it does right before sunset. The doctor's voice was calm, too calm. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need you to come in and discuss the results." I knew right then. You don't get asked to come in for good news. The next day, I sat in the sterile office, the faint smell of disinfectant in the air, as the doctor explained. They had found a mass in my lungs. They couldn't confirm without a biopsy, but the word malignant floated into the conversation like a ghost nobody wanted to acknowledge. My wife's hand tightened around mine. I couldn't feel my feet. My ears were ringing. It was as if my brain couldn't process the words in real time. You think you'll have something wise or strong to say in moments like that. I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the printout of my scan, the gray shape that apparently had the power to rewrite my life. The biopsy came next. Then the confirmation, stage 3 lung cancer. I remember my daughter's face when we told her. She tried so hard to be brave. She nodded, asked questions, even made a joke about how my hospital gown would make me look like a wizard. But I saw the way her eyes glistened when she thought I wasn't looking. From that day forward, life shifted into two worlds, before diagnosis and after diagnosis. Before, my days were filled with small plans, fixing the porch, buying concert tickets, deciding where to go for our anniversary. After, my calendar became a map of treatments, tests, and appointments. The language of my life changed to chemo, white blood cell counts, treatment cycles. It's strange, cancer makes time feel both slower and more urgent. Each day drags under the weight of exhaustion, but each week slips away before you've had the chance to really live it. Somewhere in those early weeks, my daughter quietly decided she was going to be more than just my cheerleader. She became my advocate. She'd ask the doctors questions I didn't think to ask. She'd research late into the night. She even started writing down my symptoms on a notepad, just in case I forgot to mention something important. I didn't know it at the time, but she was already planting the seeds for the moment that would bring a famous TV pastor into my hospital room. But before we got there were endless days of treatment. Long hours sitting in chairs with IVs hooked to my arm, the faint smell of antiseptic and coffee lingering in the air. The quiet hum of the chemo room, the sound of hope and fear sitting side by side. And that's where I met the doctor who would one day smile at my daughter's words. At first, he was all business. Numbers. Charts. Adjusting my medication. But over time, he started lingering a little longer after appointments, asking about my family, about the things I missed doing. I didn't realize it then, but he was paying closer attention to me than I thought. That would matter later. Hospitals are strange places. They're full of people at their most vulnerable, yet somehow, there are still moments that make you laugh until your stomach hurts, even if that laugh comes with an 4-pole and a heart monitor beeping in the background. By the time I'd been admitted for the third time, the hospital had become a second home. I knew which vending machines gave you the freshest snacks, which nurses liked to hum along to the radio, and which hallways were quiet enough to sneak in an uninterrupted nap. My days fell into a pattern: wake up to the sound of carts squeaking down the hallway. Get poked and prodded by a nurse who somehow managed to be both gentle and merciless at the same time. Eat breakfast that looked like it had been prepared by someone who had never met salt. But in between the needles and the bland food, there were bright spots. The night nurse, Clara, had a wicked sense of humor and an endless supply of bad puns. The janitor, Bill, always stopped by to talk baseball, even though he knew I rooted for his team's rival. And then there was the therapy dog program, my personal favorite, where a golden retriever named Daisy would visit once a week and make the whole floor smell faintly of sunshine and dog treats. And, of course, there was my doctor. When I first met him, he was all efficiency. No wasted words, no unnecessary small talk. But somewhere along the line, that started to change. One morning, I asked him, half joking, if I was ever going to get hospital food that didn't taste like damp cardboard. Without missing a beat, he said, only if you smuggle it in. The next day, he showed up with a paper bag from a deli downtown and a conspiratorial look in his eyes. Don't tell dietary, he whispered, sliding me the best turkey sandwich I'd had in months. That sandwich was more than food, it was a reminder that I was still a person, not just a patient. And little by little, moments like that made the days feel less like a blur of treatment and more like life. My daughter visited as often as she could. Some days, she'd bring books to read aloud, slipping in funny voices for the minor characters just to make me roll my eyes. Other days, she'd show up with photos she'd printed from her phone, our family vacation to the mountains, her college graduation, even the old photo of me wearing socks with sandals that she swore would haunt me forever. It wasn't all light moments, though. There were nights when the pain kept me awake, when the beeping of machines became a kind of mechanical lullaby that wouldn't let me rest. Times when the weight of it all, the illness, the treatments, the uncertainty, felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. But then, just when I thought I couldn't take another minute, something would happen to break the tension. Like the morning a nurse tripped over my 4-line, swore under her breath, then looked at me wide-eyed and said, "You didn't hear that?" Or the time my daughter convinced me to wear a ridiculous knitted beanie shaped like a cheeseburger to lighten the mood. It worked. Even the stoic doctor cracked a smile that day. Those little moments of joy didn't cure my cancer, but they gave me something just as important. They reminded me I was still me. And somewhere in that stretch of days, my daughter began working on something she kept completely to herself. She had started reaching out, writing emails, making calls. I noticed her stepping out of the room to take phone calls that made her voice quieter, more deliberate. I figured she was talking to friends or extended family about my condition. I didn't know she was setting into motion a plan that would end with a famous TV pastor knowing my name. The day she finally told me, the day she walked into that hospital room and delivered the news, was still a few weeks away. But looking back, I can see now that it was during this period, these strange, in-between days of pain and laughter, that the stage was being set. And my doctor, the same one who once barely said 2 words outside of medical terms, was about to play an unexpected role in it all. It started, as so many things do these days, with a late-night internet search. My daughter told me later that she had been lying awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling, her mind running circles around one stubborn thought: there has to be something more I can do for Dad. She had already been there for me in every practical way: rides to treatments, endless hours in waiting rooms, even arguing with insurance reps on my behalf. But she wanted something that wasn't about charts or medication. She wanted something that reached deeper, into that place where fear lives, and maybe, just maybe, could touch it with hope. That's when she thought of him. The pastor. Not just any pastor, but the kind whose face you recognize instantly from Sunday morning broadcasts. The kind who fills stadiums with people seeking encouragement. The kind my wife used to listen to on the radio while folding laundry. Now, my daughter's not the type to write fan mail, but that night she opened her laptop, found the contact form on his ministry website, and started typing. She introduced herself, told them about me, my diagnosis, and how much I meant to her. She explained that I wasn't exactly a church every Sunday type, but that I was fighting hard, and maybe, just maybe, hearing from someone who spent their life giving hope could make a difference. When she hit send, she assumed it would vanish into some massive inbox that an assistant skimmed once a week. She didn't expect an answer. But 2 days later, she got one. It was short. Personal. It said, "Thank you for sharing your father's story. Please give me a number where I can reach you. I'd like to speak to him directly." At first, she thought it was a prank. But the email came from the official domain. She read it 3 times, her heart thudding in her chest. Over the next week, she traded messages with his assistant. They wanted to know when I was most alert, what hospital I was in, and if I'd be comfortable speaking with him. She kept it all secret from me, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she didn't want to get my hopes up if it fell through. Meanwhile, she was juggling her own life, work deadlines, bills, groceries, all while carrying this growing secret in her pocket. She told me later it felt like she was holding onto a little spark, trying to shield it from the wind until it could become something bigger. Finally, they set a day. The pastor would call the hospital directly, speak with my daughter first, and then, if I was up for it, he'd say a prayer with me over the phone. That morning, she showed up at the hospital earlier than usual. I noticed she was dressed a little nicer than her typical jeans and sweater visits. Her eyes had that same brightness they'd have on Christmas morning when she was a kid. I didn't think much of it until she started pacing the hallway outside my room, phone in hand, glancing at the clock every few minutes. "Everything okay?" I asked. She smiled quickly. "Yeah, just waiting for a call." Then, it came. Her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize, but she knew exactly who it was. She stepped into the hallway to answer. I couldn't hear the words, but I could tell from her face the mixture of awe, focus, and barely contained excitement that this was the call. A minute later, she stepped back in, phone pressed to her chest. "Dad," she said softly, "there's someone who wants to pray for you." And that's when she told me who it was. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly unexpected that my brain didn't know what else to do. Then I looked at her, and I could see how much it meant to her. I nodded. "All right. Let's do it." She put the call on speaker. The voice that came through was warm, steady, and somehow familiar, the kind of voice you'd believe if it told you the storm was passing, even while the thunder still rolled outside. He asked me my name again, just to make sure he got it right. He asked how I was feeling. He didn't rush. Then, in a quiet, deliberate tone, he began to pray. I closed my eyes. The words were simple: hope, strength, healing. But in that moment, they felt like more than just words. When it was over, he wished me well, told me to keep fighting, and said he'd be thinking of me. My daughter's eyes were shining. And that's when my doctor walked in. The phone was still in my daughter's hand when the door swung open. My doctor stepped in, clipboard tucked under his arm, the faint scent of coffee clinging to him. He took one look at the two of us, me sitting there with my eyes still closed, my daughter smiling through tears, and paused. "What's going on in here?" he asked, setting the clipboard on the counter. My daughter glanced at me as if asking for permission. I gave a little nod. She turned back to him and said, almost proudly, "A famous TV pastor just prayed for my dad." Now, here's the thing about my doctor: I'd gotten used to his expressions being fairly predictable. Professional. Neutral. A smile here and there, sure, but always measured. This time was different. The corners of his mouth curved into a genuine, almost amused grin, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. He leaned against the counter and let out a quiet chuckle. "Well," he said, shaking his head slightly, "that's not something I hear every day." It wasn't sarcasm. It wasn't a polite brush-off. It was sincere. Warm. Almost as if, in that moment, he was rooting for me in a way that went beyond medicine. I don't know what he believed personally. Maybe he was religious, maybe he wasn't. But there was something in that smile, an acknowledgement that, whether or not it could be measured or charted, what had just happened mattered. For a moment, the hospital room didn't feel like a place of sickness. It felt like a place where something good had happened. The doctor stayed longer than usual that day. He asked how I was feeling, not just physically, but emotionally. He listened as my daughter told the whole story, from the late-night email to the phone call just minutes earlier. At one point, he glanced at me and said, "You know, there's more to healing than what we can do in here. Sometimes, hope is its own kind of medicine." I'm not sure if he meant it philosophically or scientifically. I just knew it resonated. When he finally left, the room felt quiet again, but not the heavy kind of quiet I'd gotten used to. This was lighter. My daughter sat down beside me, still holding her phone like it was some kind of talisman. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Better than okay." We didn't talk for a while after that. We didn't need to. Sometimes the silence after a moment like that is its own conversation. That afternoon, nurses came and went. Machines beeped and monitors blinked. But underneath it all, I carried this new undercurrent, not a miraculous cure, not a sudden surge of strength, but a shift. A reminder that I wasn't just fighting an illness. I was living a story. Over the next few days, the pastor's words replayed in my head. Not word for word, I'm not sure I could repeat them exactly even if I tried, but the feeling they carried. That I wasn't alone. That my fight wasn't invisible. And every time my doctor came in after that, there was a little more warmth in his tone, a little more patience in his eyes. Maybe it was just my perception. Or maybe, just maybe, that day had touched him too. I've had plenty of medical appointments in my life. Most of them blur together into a checklist of symptoms, tests, and prescriptions. But that day, that was different. That was the day a prayer crossed the sterile walls of a hospital room, landed somewhere deep inside me, and, judging by that doctor's smile, maybe even landed somewhere in him too. In the weeks after that day, life in the hospital carried on. Tests, treatments, the shuffle of nurses in and out, but something had shifted for me. I wasn't suddenly healthier. My scans didn't magically clear overnight. But my spirit, it was different. You see, before that moment, my world had gotten very small. Cancer has a way of doing that. Your life shrinks down to numbers on charts, the four walls of your room, the short walk from your bed to the bathroom. Days blur together until you forget what month it is. But after that prayer, after seeing my daughter's joy and my doctor's unexpected smile, I started noticing more again. The way the afternoon sun poured across the hospital floor. The faint scent of fresh coffee drifting from the nurse's station. The sound of laughter from 2 rooms down when a volunteer played guitar for another patient. I started talking more, too. Not just polite, surface-level talk, but real conversations. I asked my nurses about their families. I learned the janitor's favorite fishing spot. I even got my doctor to admit he once accidentally called a patient by the wrong name for 3 months straight. I began to realize that while my body was under attack, my heart didn't have to be. One afternoon, my daughter came in with a small notepad. On the front page, she had written, "Things we'll do when you're better." The list started small: eat pizza from Joe's, go fishing, visit the lake in the fall. But as the days passed, we kept adding more: road trip to the mountains, take a family photo on the porch, sit outside and watch the stars. That list became a lifeline. On bad days, we'd read it aloud and imagine the details: the smell of pine trees, the crunch of autumn leaves underfoot, the taste of pepperoni from Joe's Pizza. It wasn't denial. I knew my diagnosis was serious. I knew the road ahead was long. But for the first time in months, I could picture a future. And here's the thing I want you to take from this: the pastor's prayer didn't fix my cancer. It didn't replace my treatments. But it did do something real. It reminded me that hope doesn't just sit quietly in the corner. Sometimes it comes crashing through the door, holding a phone, grinning like my daughter did, and saying, "You're not alone in this." That moment made me see that healing isn't only physical. It's emotional. It's relational. It's the look in your doctor's eyes when they see you not as a case, but as a person worth rooting for. It's the sound of your daughter's laughter breaking up the hospital quiet. Weeks later, when I was discharged for a short break between treatments, I walked outside and felt the cold air on my face. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, letting the world feel big again. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe more treatments. Maybe more hospital stays. But I do know this: that prayer, that smile, that day, they're part of me now. So, if you're watching this and you're in your own fight, whether it's with illness, loss, or something you can't even name, remember this: sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the smallest moments, a smile, a call, a few words spoken with care, can change everything. If my story has touched you, please share it. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone, that someone out there is thinking of them, rooting for them, praying for them. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Not because it helps me, though it does, but because it helps spread hope. And right now, the world could use a little more of that.